Let's get joined up. Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joined up. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. So thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a regular show about all things writing, including interviews with authors, screenwriters, and key figures from the publishing industry, plus loads of hints, tips, and inspiration for all kinds of creatives. You can follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast, leave a quick iTunes review, or just tell a friend. Right, cue that cheesy theme tune.
Put down your pen and stop your typing. Grab yourself a drink, 'cause it's Joined Up Writing.
Yes, hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 110 with Steff Green, best-selling indie author of fantasy, paranormal, steampunk and too many other genres besides. Steff has got a really interesting personal story and has got much to say on productivity and her writing process. It's only been a few days since I recorded my last intro, so I don't have any big updates on what I've been up to, but I am about to go on holiday for a couple of weeks and have made a resolution of sorts that I will share with you now to give me some semblance of accountability. So while I'm away, I'm going to make it my mission to send at least one new submission of my novel every day. I'm submitting to agents and I really need to step it up with the amount of subs that I'm getting out there. So by the time I get back, I want to have sent a minimum of 14 new submissions. Now, that might not sound like a big ask, but each submission takes probably 20 minutes, half an hour, including the researching the agent, checking their guidelines and making sure my materials are exactly as they should be, because you have to do a cover letter and some people want a synopsis a certain length and some people want certain word counts and chapters, and etc, etc. And as well as that, I want to do my rewrites that I've been planning on the latest draft of the sitcom that I've been co-writing. And I also want to do some more work, however minimal that is, on the sequel to Safe Hands. So that's my target for the next couple of weeks, but what about you? What are your plans? What plans are you putting in place for the near future? How are you managing your writing goals? So let me know by tweeting at JU Podcast or drop a line on the Facebook page, or you can email me at wayne@waynekellywrites.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the email newsletter by going to joinedupwriting.co.uk and clicking on the tab that says newsletter and free stuff. So that's different to the normal just follow by email. This is a specific newsletter and mailing list that I've got set up, so you need to click on that. It's completely free and there are some freebies that you can download straight away just for doing that and for following the podcast. And finally, a quick reminder to leave an iTunes, Apple podcast rating and 5-star review for the show. It takes seconds to do and helps other people find the show. And if you can't be bothered to do that, well, how about you just recommend the show to a fellow writer or creative, and I'd really appreciate it. Okay, let's get on with today's interview with Steff Green. So Steff is a USA Today best-selling and award-winning author, blogger, metalhead and heavy metal maiden living in an off-grid home on 4 acres of rural paradise in New Zealand. She publishes dark fantasy and science fiction under the name SC Green and paranormal romance as Steffanie Holmes. She is an incredibly prolific and successful indie author, and I was lucky enough to chat to her via Skype back in April. Okay, Steff, thanks loads for joining me on Joined Up Writing Podcast. I really, really appreciate it. So why don't you start off by telling us, well, first of all, tell us how things are and where you're speaking from, and actually when you're speaking from, because technically speaking, you're speaking to me from the future.
That's correct. Thanks so much for having me, Wayne. And yes, I am speaking from the future. I am here in New Zealand, in my house, which is kind of overlooking a rural valley. In the middle of New Zealand.
Nice.
And it's tomorrow. So.
Yeah, it's tomorrow. This is 9 p.m. for me, but it's 8 a.m. for you at the moment, isn't it?
Yep, correct.
The following day, yeah. So why don't you tell me a little bit about, for people that might not be familiar with you and your work, so tell us a little bit about your books and your background for a start.
Sure. So yes, my name is Steff Green, and I publish under two different pen names: Steffanie Holmes, which is paranormal romance, and SC Green, or I'm actually in the middle of changing it to Steff Green, which is kind of fantasy books and also some kind of odd, interesting projects for kids. So that's kind of my catch-all pen name. So I am completely self-published, and I've got 30 books now. I'm just publishing my 30th book this week, so I'm probably going to have a few more by the time the podcast. Thank you. Yeah, by the time the podcast goes live. And what else? I quit my day job last year, February 2018, to write full time, and it's pretty much as much fun as you could possibly imagine a job being. So I don't ever want to go back. So
that's great. So you managed to get towards 30 books before you gave up your job, even.
So I think I had 18 books when I quit my job. It was around 20. So I'm at the moment I am publishing a book about. So last year I published 5 books, and this year I'm up to I'm just about to publish book number 4. So that's like a book a month, which is quite terrifying to think about. Yeah.
So how do you manage to keep up that kind of level of work, and how are you so prolific?
So I kind of started taking self-publishing and writing really, really seriously about 2015. And the story of how that kind of happened is kind of funny. So it's a little bit, it's going to come back to the question, but it's a little bit off the side of the question.
That's good. I like that.
So I way back in the dim dark ages, when I was at university, I was writing this vampire series, kind of vampire fantasy story, and I was training to be an archaeologist, and I am also legally blind, and so when I finished my degree and I was trying to get a job as an archaeologist or a museum curator or whatever, I kept coming up against this wall of people who just blanket refused to hire me or give me a chance or anything like that because of my eyesight. They were saying you can't, you're going to destroy the artifacts, and you're a health and safety risk, and all this ridiculous stuff. And it was completely bonkers, but that's the reality of what happened. And I was kind of staring down this career path where I was going to have to constantly convince people that I could do a job that I knew I could do. And so I was getting really frustrated and upset, and my husband said to me, well, maybe you could have a think about, maybe you could say, well, actually you've done archaeology, you've been on all these excavations for uni. I got to go to Greece and Crete and do some work. I worked in a lab. It was all really awesome stuff that I'd done. So he was saying, well, maybe you could think about if there was something else you wanted to do that wasn't a thing that you would have to constantly go through this process with, then, maybe it's a good time to have a bit of a pivot.
Yeah.
And so I kind of thought, and I was like, he might be onto something there. And the first thing that came to mind was this thing that I love doing, which was writing. And I thought, well, I'd love to be a writer, but I had no idea how to be a writer. So I thought I did what any self-respecting millennial would do, and I Googled how to make a living as a writer, and I tried to do all of the things. So I started a blog, and I was writing for magazines, and I was doing all this kind of stuff while kind of working an unrelated job. And then I also had this vampire book, and so I sent it off to a competition to win the chance to pitch it in front of a publisher, and I won, and I got to go down to Wellington from Auckland in New Zealand and pitch it to this big publisher in Australia, and she was like, oh, I'm really interested. And so basically I worked with her on this vampire series for about 5 years, and she ultimately rejected it.
After 5 years?
Yeah, after 5 years.
Jeez.
like like 4 rewrites. She ultimately rejected it, and she said, "Just send me anything else that you've ever written, that you're writing." So I was writing this this very dark steampunk kind of China Mayville's sort of book with set in Victorian England, but Victorian England that dinosaurs hadn't died out, so it was really cool. So I was writing that, and so I sent her that book, and we kind of did a back and forth on it for a year or so, and then she said, "Look, I really love this book, I'd really love to publish it, but it's not the first book in the series. You need to go back and write the first book where all this interesting stuff happens that you're kind of talking about as happening in the past." So I went and wrote that first book. Turned out it was actually 2 books, so then I had to write 2 books. I sent that to her. They were really excited. They were like, "We're going to give you a publishing deal." And then the publisher, the editor that I was working with, retired, and the publishing house split her. They decided that this was a really good time to kind of rein in her line, so they dropped a whole bunch of people, and I was one of the people that got dropped. So I'd been working with this person for years and years, and I thought I'd finally made it, and then it was no. So that was around the time that self-publishing was starting to be in the media a lot. Kind of people like Hugh Howey and Amanda Hocking were doing really well, and I was starting to think, well, maybe that would be an option instead of just having to start all over from scratch trying to find a publisher for this series. So I self-published the 2 of the books in that series a year apart, and I was kind of selling about I was making about $20 a month. I remember $10 or $20 a month off of it, so not like heaps of money, but it was just so cool to finally have these books in print, and it was just awesome. And then one day I was at a party, and I was talking with a friend about 50 Shades of Grey, and she was saying, "Oh, I really love these books," and I said, "Oh, I'd read the first chapter and found it really hard to get into, and just the writing is terrible, and I just and so and she was getting a bit mad at me being a bit high and mighty about these books, and so she said, "Well, it's not like you could write a book like that, could you?" And I sort of, I sort of out loud, I went, yeah, you're right, that's totally not my kind of book. And then in my head I was like, okay, well, challenge.
It's a challenge. Accepted. The gauntlet's been thrown down, yeah.
Yeah, it's been thrown down. So in secret, without telling anybody, I didn't even tell my husband, I wrote this kind of paranormal romance book. It was only a novella. It was sort of 30,000 words. And I wrote it in about 3 weeks just for fun, and it just flew off my fingers. It was just, I was having heaps of fun. And there was kind of no pressure for it to ever be anything, because I hadn't told anyone I was doing it. And so I paid someone about $50 to make a cover for it, and I made up a pen name, a secret pen name, and I published it. And it sold like 1,000 copies in the first week. And I was like, what? No. No, I've worked like 10 years on this fantasy series, and I'm making, I sold like 3 copies a month, and this book I wrote in 3 weeks, sold 1,000 copies. I just couldn't believe it. And I kept thinking, well, maybe Amazon's just got something wrong. And I kept thinking, oh, they're going to call me and they're going to say, oh, we've given you someone else's royalties, but they never called. And so I thought, well, I better write another book. So I wrote the second book, like second little novella, and that only took a couple of weeks as well, and released that, and then it just kept selling. So I kind of sheepishly had to tell my husband that, well, actually I made quite a lot of money this month, but it wasn't from my science fiction books, it was from these romance books. And he says, well, are you going to write any more? And I thought, well, yeah, actually I am. And so I found that because the stories aren't like, I didn't need to do all this super deep research into the historical periods in order to get things right. I found that the books just, and because they're so character driven, they just flew off my fingers. And so, yeah, I wrote 3 books in that series, and I just kept going. And then when I worked from home, I could kind of get up at 5 a.m. and do a couple of hours before I actually had to kind of sign in for work.
Yeah.
So I managed to kind of keep that schedule of sort of finishing a book every 2 to 3 months for all the years while I was at work, and just by kind of being quite, here's a block of time when I'm not doing anything.
Yeah, being disciplined with it.
Yeah, being super disciplined. Yeah, and after a while, there's a pattern to the books, and you kind of know the pattern and you know the beats that you have to hit. And so, sort of as soon as you get the characters and you've got the world in your head, and all my books are in series, so they'll always be set in the same world, even if they might have different characters.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a few different worlds, but yeah, I always work in the series. So sort of a lot of that kind of world building stuff is already done for you because you've done it in the previous books. So yeah, I was just able to do that, and especially the last year before I quit my job, we kind of said, because I was offered an opportunity for a really awesome job, but it was going to be a 5-hour commute 3 days a week.
Jeez, right.
Yeah. And so we said we're going to take the job because it's a lot of money. We could save money. We could finish building our house because my husband and I crazily decided to build our own house. So that was it's a whole other story. So we could finish building this house, but we said if we take it, then I'm only going to do it for a year, because if I do it for longer than a year, I'll just burn out.
Yeah.
And so that was like a deadline hanging over my head, was that in a year's time I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to write from home, which was the thing I really wanted to do. So I kind of focused really hard on only the things that would get me closer to that goal, because I had just so limited time with that big commute. So I was just writing books as fast as I could, and I wasn't focusing on, like, I wasn't updating my blog, I was hardly doing any social media. It was just focusing on the thing that earned the most money, which was publishing books.
Yeah.
And then I was also like kind of gathering freelance work and trying to do that in the evenings and on the weekends and stuff. And then by the time I quit, I had enough freelance work that if my books massively tanked, we could still pay the mortgage. And then over the year, I've gradually, as I've been able to do things like kind of build the business a bit more, I've been able to drop most of that freelance work, and pretty much all my time is just spent writing books and talking to fans. And yeah.
It must have been, for all those books to have been produced. It's pretty impressive. So tell us a little bit about, so what's your background in terms of your childhood, and what's the first memory you have of writing? When did you realise that you could write?
I've always enjoyed telling stories and making up stories, and I very definitely used to write a lot of stories, or that kind of thing, as a kid. And I love art as well, so I would draw a lot. Mm-hmm. And I'd always been I wanted to be an archaeologist since I was about 7. Like, I was one of those kids that was always super obsessed with something. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to be an architect, and then I wanted to be a paleontologist, a dinosaur scientist, and then was an archaeologist until university. But then I would always say on the side I wanted to be an artist and or a writer, depending on what one I preferred at the time. Mm-hmm. So I would it's always in the back of my head that was something I was always going to be doing. And I remember that one of the first stories I remember writing, although it was definitely not the first one I wrote, was I think we had to write something for class. I can't really remember. But I'd written the story about my cat, Benji, who's a black cat, and as if he was a detective, and he worked for this detective agency. It was called the Alley Cat Detective Agency, and he solved crimes for other animals. I had fun, so I kept writing sequels.
So it's fair to say that from kind of an early age, you were kind of driven by this idea of having an audience and a readership, and that's kind of what motivates you, would you say? If you know that there's somebody there waiting to hear your story or hear what you've got to say, then you're kind of driven to produce something.
Yeah, I really think so. I think I have always kind of liked to entertain people. Like, I really like it when people laugh at things that I say, or when I was at high school, I was quite involved in drama. Like, I liked being in front of an audience, and I'm very much not an extrovert. But I always, I write for myself, but also I'm always aware that there's an audience, and it was always important for me to have an audience, I think. Yeah.
Definitely. So you mentioned earlier at the top of the show, you talked about some of the issues that you've got around. I think you've got quite a rare condition that means you're legally blind. So how does that affect your daily life for people that are not familiar? Tell us about what the condition is, if you're okay talking about that, and how, what impact, if any, does it have on your writing process, and how does it inform your work, would you say?
So I'm more than happy to talk about it. So the condition that I have is called achromatopsia, and a normal person's eyes have rod cells and cone cells, and at a very basic level, you use the cone cells during the day, and they are the ones that kind of distinguish colours and depth and all that kind of stuff. And you use the rod cells at night, and they kind of help you to see in the night, but they don't distinguish color and things like that. So you've got millions of each of them, whereas I have rod cells but no cone cells, and so I have no color vision whatsoever, and I'm quite it's like using your night vision during the day. So if there's really bright light, like if there's a sun streaming in a window, or if I'm outside in the sun, or if I have to look at a whiteboard for any period of time, the glare gets to me really badly, and that condition also will usually come with sort of side conditions. So I have nystagmus, which is where my eyes wobble all the time, and I have quite severe short-sightedness, to the point where because the combination of those things, I'm considered legally blind. So that's what I got. That's me, cornucopia of eye conditions. And as to how it affects me, it's a little bit hard to say, because it's a genetic condition, and so I've had it since I was born, and it's never going to get better, but it's also never going to get worse. So it's quite a stable condition. So I don't know any other reality apart from this one. But what I do is, I have on my computer, I have the screen contrast reversed. So instead of a white background with black letters, I've got a black background with white letters, and that helps with the glare. And then I've got the super dark office, it's got kind of blood red walls and black bookshelves. It's really sexy. And a curtain that I can pull across if the light from the window gets too bad, but the window's kind of perfectly situated that I get natural light, but not like sun streaming in. So it's kind of perfectly designed for me. So that's sort of my basic setup. And if I've got that, I can work for hours and hours, and I'm perfectly happy. Where the condition can be a bit annoying is I travel a lot to do things like I go and speak at writers' festivals and give self-publishing workshops, and I can't just get in the car and go to a place. So and because we live rurally, and I also can't get from my house to anywhere without someone driving me, because there's no bus out here or anything like that. So the process of getting places can be a bit, often I have to include an extra day or so, just because I'm going to have to travel on public transport, and I can't just get up in the morning and drive myself to the airport at 3 a.m. So I have to stay the night with a friend in the city, and then take a thing out to the airport and things like that. So
lots of kind of practical knock-ons.
Yeah, so there's a lot of practical things like that. It's kind of small things,
but they all kind of add up. And as you say, because you haven't, I guess the difference, as you say, is because you were born with a condition. It's not like you learned to do things a certain way and then had to relearn them. As this is you, this is your life, this is how you get by, sort of thing.
Yeah, and Yeah, exactly. And I have grown in confidence quite a lot over the years. I just last month I took a trip to Australia to speak, and it's probably one of the first times I've travelled internationally by myself. And 10 years ago, I don't know if I would have done that.
Mm-hmm.
I think I might have begged a friend to go with me or something like it. Yeah, that would have just been quite wow, but I just hopped on a plane. It was no problem.
And do you think a lot of that comes from, your success now as a writer, and obviously I know you, as you say, you do a lot of public speaking and different things. What do you think's kind of led you to that point where you've got that kind of confidence?
I like to do things that scare me a little bit. And I mean, public speaking still scares me a little bit.
Yeah.
And I get nervous every time I publish a book. What if people don't like it and stuff like that? But I'm, all the really awesome things in life are the things that are hard. Like all the easy things are, they're not as awesome as the hard things. So I really like to kind of do things that scare me, and I do that so often these days that I think it rubs off.
Yeah, it keeps you going. So why don't you tell us? You mentioned before. What's I'll say your latest book release. Obviously, you're releasing them so often, but what's the one that you mentioned you've got coming out sort of now as we record this?
So I've got a few little projects on the go. I've got obviously the next book in my current main romance series is coming out in probably a week or so, and it's called Memoirs of a Garrotter. And the reason it's called that is because the series is it's kind of a paranormal it's almost like a cozy mystery series, except that it is it's a bit steamy, so it's not quite cozy mystery because there's
you don't tend to get too many garrotters, do you, in cozy?
And you also don't get too many garrotters. But it's set in a kind of a magical bookshop, and so all the titles in the series are kind of puns on murder and death and crimes, but also on book titles. So I think the first book is a dead and stormy night instead of like a dark and stormy night, and the second book is Of Mice and Murder, and then the third book is one of my favorites, is Pride and Premeditation. So I'm having a lot of fun with that series. It's probably my most successful romance series so far, and the new one's coming out, and I'm really excited about that. And then I've also got so last year I ran a Kickstarter campaign with a friend of mine who's Brie, who's an illustrator, and we wrote a kids book, picture book, and it's called Only Freaks Turn Things into Bones, and it is about a little Grim Reaper who gets bullied because he's different, and then he kind of discovers that kind of learns to celebrate the fact that he's different, and that's okay, and it doesn't make him evil or bad or anything like that. So that is coming out May the 17th. So I'm kind of gearing up for the launch of that, and that's really exciting.
Brilliant. So loads of stuff going on. So obviously, as you mentioned, so you're really successful as an indie author, and it's kind of quite clear why you decided to go that route after the kind of hellish beginning that you had trying to do something, traditionally. So, but give us a sense of the kind of work involved, because, is it a case that you're writing these things and then you're throwing them up on Amazon? I doubt it. So just explain to me, do you have a team, that works with you on these different things? Explain that for us.
So my process goes like this. I write the book, which maybe is 4 to 6 weeks, kind of depends on how long the book ends up being. So I write the book, and then I print the book out, and then I hand it to my husband, who is my beta reader, and he reads through the book and makes lots of red marks on it about things that I could do better. And while he's doing that, because it often takes, he's a bit slow, so often because he has a job, so so often takes him a couple of weeks. So while he's doing that, I start the next book. So he gives it back to me. I fix all the little things that he's noted in the book, and then I send it off to my editor, and she takes about 3 to 5 days to go through it and comes back. And usually I used to send to a proofreader as well, and just to clean up any final errors. But I've actually, just because I'm releasing so quickly, I've found that I've ended up mostly dropping that, which is not ideal. But I'm just, I'm loving the fast releases at the moment. So, so sometimes I will send to a proofreader who will take, again, sort of 3 to 5 days, and then, but usually I'll just go straight up on Amazon, and I put everything into Kindle Unlimited for the first, basically until I think I've sort of got a number in my head where I think Kindle Unlimited isn't working for me anymore. And then once a series hits that number, I will pull it out and take it wide. So my backlist is wide, but my most recent books are in Kindle Unlimited. And then release day, I will just announce it in my Facebook group and send it out to my newsletter, and maybe depends on the book and the subgenre. Maybe I'll have like a kind of like a Facebook takeover on a big genre page or something like that, just to kind of try and get it in front of new people, or maybe I'll have some ads set up, because that's kind of my big project at the moment, is to learn how to get better at Facebook ads and things like that.
Technical side of stuff. What do you find? I mean, obviously you've been successful at it, so there must be a certain element of you that enjoys it. But how do you find that other stuff, that less creative stuff, if you like, or at least it's not the writing, the non-writing stuff? How do you find that compared to sitting down at the keyboard and writing the stories?
It's all kind of fun, but it's all different kinds of fun. I think I probably have the kind of mind or mindset that was almost destined to run my own business in some way. And when I used to work in the tech industry, I was kind of in marketing, so I had a lot of the sort of the skills already. I knew about newsletter marketing, and a little bit about social media and things like that. So I was really lucky in that I kind of had a lot of those skills already. I just enjoy it. And what's nice is, you can come out if you need a break from just sitting in front of the computer typing words for a few hours. Then it can be kind of nice to go on your Facebook page
and do something different.
Talk. Do something a little bit different. Just change things up while still being productive. I mean, with marketing, there's always a giant list of things to do, which is longer than the amount of time that I have available. So. So I'm always trying to prioritize sort of what's actually going to shift me to the next level. So, and that can change depending on the month,
depending on what's going on. And what would you say? Not in terms of your marketing and all that stuff, but just in general in your career, what would you say has been the biggest challenge or roadblock you've faced along the way so far? And tell me how you overcame it.
But I've definitely got in my own way a few times. I had a kind of probably two things. So I mean, the first thing is I've definitely got in my own way a few times. So I've always had this discipline about getting the books out every 2 to 3 months. But sometimes that's not kind of all of the equation. So the first books I had. After the first series, a lot of the books I basically hired the wrong cover designer, and she was a very good designer, but she didn't understand the market
and what you were working with.
So they were good covers, but they weren't right for the genre. And so I had those for quite a long time, and I think that hamstringed me a bit in early years, sort of the first 2 years, and then I had a couple of years sort of 2016, 2017, where I kind of jumped around series a lot. So, I released one book, which was the first book in a series, and it was the most successful thing I'd done to date. So what I then did was, instead of releasing the second book, it was that I went and did an unrelated project, and then I did another unrelated project, and then it wasn't until a year later where I came back to the second book in that series, and by the time I'd done that, all the readers from the first one had forgotten about me. So I think I probably could have left my job a year earlier if I hadn't have done that. So now I'm quite strict about, especially if something's working,
you kind of bash out the series sort of thing, you follow it through. And what would you say, just as we kind of move towards wrapping things up, so what would you say is the most helpful piece of creative or inspirational advice you've been given, or that you would give to other aspiring writers?
I always know this question is coming, and I always never remember what it's going to say. I think for me, the most, because sometimes it can be a bit scary. I was terrified. I was so terrified of quitting my job, which was an exceptionally well paid, lots of benefits, very awesome job in the tech industry that most people would kill for. And I was like, why am I leaving this? Am I just crazy? And, especially when Amazon was doing this and Amazon was doing that, it's all a nightmare. And one of the things, and it's a thing that a really good writer friend of mine sort of said to me, not in these exact words, but basically she's like, you can kind of look at it in two ways. You can always look at this industry and go, well, the publishing industry in general, and go, well, the sky is falling. It was never as good as it was 5 years ago. You've missed the boat. You can look at it like that, or you can look at it and say, well, if I want to have a long-term career at this, and I want to be a business owner and entrepreneur, then I have to learn how to be resilient, and that things are going to be very different in 5 years' time, and 5 years' time after that, and you're either going to sink or you're going to swim. And if you want to swim, then you have to kind of change and adapt, and a lot of that is sort of what I learned from the tech industry, which is very much like that. You have to move really quickly, and kind of adapt to things, and you've got to trust yourself that what you're doing, when the time comes, you will find a way through, and that trusting yourself, I think, is really key. And that's a thing I've been learning, and I feel a lot since I kind of been focusing on that. I feel really happy and really excited about the future, instead of really worried every time Amazon throws a spanner in the works. Yeah.
You're sort of embracing the change.
Yeah. I'm like, bring it on, but also don't. But yeah,
bring it on. Yeah, but if they do bring it on, you think you'll be more ready for it, and you'll be ready to face whatever's thrown at you.
Yeah, I feel really confident that I built a solid foundation, and I've got a solid foundation of fans that if I had to drastically change things, I'd be able to rebuild or pivot, or I think I'll be here for a long time.
Well, that's good. And how do you deal with self-doubt in terms of when you're writing? Do you ever get self-doubt when you're in the middle of a project?
All the time, every project, every time. And I just go, oh well, if people hate it, then they hate it. Yeah, it's that fear thing. I just know these days that when I'm really afraid of something, then it's probably a really important thing that I should be doing. So I go, okay, well, I'm really afraid, but what's the alternative? The alternative is I don't publish this book, or I go back to my 5-hour commute, and that's pretty much enough to talk me out of any kind of fear.
It's a pretty good motivator.
It is, rather.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, where can people find out more about you and your work and find your books?
So the best place to find everything that is about me is on my website, which is steffmetal.com, so STEFFMETAL, and you'll find all my books from my 2 pen names and all my different projects, and also I have a sort of a bi-weekly newsletter for writers, which is, you'll find it under the For Writers section on my website. And so every couple of weeks I publish an article about self-publishing or writing or resilience or just things I think are interesting at the time. And then I've also got a free ebook that any writer can go on and download there. It's called Unleash the Beast, releasing your inner writing monster. So and that's totally free. So that's all on my website.
That's brilliant. So there's loads of things that people can find on there, and more information. Well, that's brilliant. Well, it's been great to talk to you. I feel like I've probably kept you from writing like at least 2 books just in the time that we've been talking. How prolific you are. But Steff, for now, it's been great. So thanks for coming on Joined Up Writing.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks again to Steff, and do make sure you check out any one of her many books and projects, and I'll put all of those links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. So that's it for this week, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever else you want to get your podcasts from. Then you can have the show downloaded automatically every single episode. Also, remember to get in touch with all your writing news, views, questions or comments, and tweet me with your thoughts on the podcast, and I'll give you a mention in a future show. Look out for the next episode when I'll be chatting to Trevor Miller, a British writer and filmmaker now living and working in LA, and I'm putting that episode out next week rather than the usual 2-week break, after which there'll be a couple of weeks off so that I can have a bit of a recovery spell from my holiday. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing and reading, and I'll see you next time.
Joined up